Part 2, and it's time for some retrobriting. I was going to try the paraphractic method of leaving the case sitting in the sun, but the British weather said no. Oh well, at least I managed to disassemble both machines and clean all the parts thoroughly, or as best as I could anyway. In place of natural sunlight, I bought these two 30-watt UVA floodlights. The case of the Classic went under them for several hours covered in reflective foil whilst I got to work decapping the analog board, ready for new parts. But after 4 hours and very little change, I decided to grab the hydrogen peroxide and do it the old-fashioned way. Whilst that was going on, I managed to get myself down to the beach for tea and cake. When I got back, wow, the results were staggering. It was back to its factory colour and looking spectacular, especially next to the other machine that was still covered in plenty of gunk. So in went more water and a full litre of hydrogen peroxide. That night I pulled the back case out and dried it off. It looks stellar. I'm very pleased with how this turned out. The next day, the sun decided to pay the UK a visit, so I tried the paraphractic method again with both classics, and the lid to a 1989 2CI, more on that in a different video. I didn't see any real change in any of the parts despite being left out the majority of the day, but whilst they were baking in the sun, I was able to recap the analog board with all new parts. I'm not brilliant at soldering. I'll have to practice just a little bit more. Finally, the moment of truth. With a fully reassembled computer sans the hard disk. I used an external speaker since it's way louder than the internal, and whilst it crackled to life like it should, the CRT never fired up, and other than the fan, there were no signs of life. So out came the multimeter and some solid copper wire, and into the floppy port they went. Pin 1 on the floppy port is negative, with pin 6 being the 5-volt rail and pins 7 and 8 being the 12-volt rail. 9.8 volts on the 12 and only 4 volts on the 5. That is massively under voltage and results in a very sad Macintosh. So I investigated the analog board. If the speaker crackles to life, it means the motherboard is trying to do something, but simply can't progress any further. This small cluster of components near the transformer and caps are known to cause issues. Diodes 3, 4, 5 and 7, the opto-isolator and the transistor logic switching power supply chip. And I confirmed that diodes 3, 4 and 5 were working. The diode test mode also confirmed that one half of the opto-isolator was working by measuring across pins 1 and 2, one marked by this little dot, and is the anode of the diode. Then I switched to a 20 kilo ohm resistance test and tested across pins 4 and 5, which is the emitter and collector of the phototransistor. The switching logic chip was also easy to test. 20 kilo ohm test, and see if all the pins register proper to ground, which is pin 4. Only pin 2 doesn't give a reading, but I think that might be by design. The culprit was diode 7, which is connected to one of the outputs on the transformer. I was thinking of using the diode from my dead Revision A power board, but I don't really want to replace a 30-year-old diode with another 30-year-old diode that could be potentially failing as well. So, on to more retrobriting. And this time I thought I'd try just the UVA light method again on the ADB mouse, but this time using artificial light. No water, no peroxide, and I didn't have to disassemble the mouse. 4 to 5 hours later, it went from this to this, the original factory colour, and I'm shocked at how well this worked. So I'm baking the keyboard under those same UV lights in the background. Hopefully I can finally get this computer working once the new parts arrive, and I can finally close this now 20-day saga I've had with this Macintosh Classic and move on to the 2CI. Until then, thanks for watching.